In the spring of 1888, a widow named Clara Whitlow arrived in the Missouri Valley, a stretch of land whispered about for its cursed soil. Locals said nothing grew there, no corn, no wheat, not even wild grass. Only brittle, pale fragments that glinted under the sun like bone. But Clara didn't believe in curses. She'd buried her husband and son in the east and come west with a wagon, a mule, and a promise to herself, "I will make something live again." The townsfolk warned her. "That land's wrong," said Sheriff Madsen, tipping his hat low. "Belonged to the Crane family before the sickness took them. Every seed they planted came up white and sharp, looked like teeth, if you can believe such nonsense." Clara only smiled through chapped lips. "Then maybe it just needs a woman's touch." She signed the deed, loaded her wagon with seed and faith, and drove north toward her new beginning. Clara set to work that first week, turning the stubborn earth with her plow. It was dry and gray as ash, but she worked from dawn until dusk. She spoke to the soil as if it could hear her. "Come on now," she whispered, sweat stinging her eyes. "You've been dead long enough." Her nearest neighbor, Eli Parsons, rode by one morning with a crate of eggs. "Most folks wouldn't bother," he said. "That field hasn't grown a weed in 20 years." Clara smiled faintly. Maybe it was waiting for someone who wouldn't give up. She planted rows of corn, beans, and pumpkins. Then she waited. For weeks she watered and prayed. But when the shoots began to break the soil, her hope turned to confusion. Each sprout was small and pale, not green, but ivory white. And when she knelt closer, her heart seized. They weren't sprouts at all. They were teeth, small, human-looking teeth, rooted in the soil like plants. At first, Clara thought she was imagining things. The sun was cruel that day, and grief could twist the mind. But when she dug one up, it was unmistakable, smooth enamel, a perfect molar with a bit of bloody root still clinging to it. She screamed so loud the mule brayed in fear. That night she burned the rue she'd planted. The smell was awful, a mix of bone and smoke, but by morning, more white buds had pushed through the ashes, shining in the dawn like a mouthful of smiles. Eli came again, bringing her bread and a worried look. "You all right, Clara? You look pale." She hesitated, then said quietly, "My field's growing teeth." Eli laughed softly, then stopped when he saw her eyes. "You mean real ones?" She nodded, like God planted a jaw beneath the ground. He stared at her for a long time. "Maybe it's a sign," he said finally. "Some things want to stay buried." At night, Clara began to hear muffled noises from the earth, tiny cracks, faint clatters, like someone chewing beneath the floorboards of the world. She couldn't sleep. Every time the wind moved, she swore she heard whispering. Once, when she walked the rows with her lantern, she thought she saw the teeth shifting slightly, grinding together as if in restless sleep. She tried to pray, but the words felt hollow. So she dug. She dug deeper than she should have, until the spade struck something soft. When she cleared away the dirt, she found a jawbone, and beside it, the edge of a child's skull. Her breath broke. She dropped the lantern, and the field lit up in a sudden flame. The teeth gleamed in the firelight, hundreds of them, glowing like stars in the dark soil. And through the smoke, she thought she saw a face, her son's, smiling faintly at her from the earth. Clara ran to town at dawn, trembling. She told Sheriff Madsen everything, the teeth, the skull, the whispers. The sheriff listened in silence, then sighed. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a reason nobody farms that land. The Cranes buried their kin there after the fever, whole family of 9. Ground was never the same after he offered to send men to dig it up proper, but Clara refused. 'No,' she said. 'If the dead want to be heard, they'll speak to me.' When she returned home, there was something waiting on her porch, a folded scrap of paper, damp with dew. In faded ink, it read, "You took our field. Now you'll feed it." She looked around, heart pounding, but no one was there. Only the wide, gray land and the sound of the soil breathing under her feet. Eli Parsons came by again, uneasy. "You should come stay with my family a while," he said. "That land ain't natural." But Clara shook her head. "It's my home now." He hesitated, then told her something he'd never spoken aloud. "My brother helped the cranes when the sickness came. He said the fever made them hungry. They started talking nonsense. Said the land was taking their teeth one by one. He left before it got bad. When he came back, the cranes were gone. But the ground, it was full of bones." Clara looked out toward the field, where the teeth shimmered faintly under the moonlight. "Maybe it's not a curse," she said. "Maybe it's pain. Maybe the earth remembers what people do to it." Eli frowned. "Sometimes remembering's the worst curse there is." By midsummer, the teeth covered half the field. They grew in neat rows where Clara had planted corn shaped like molars, canines, incisors, each one unique. She tried everything to stop them. She salted the soil. She burned it. She prayed. But the more she fought, the faster they came. And when she finally gave up and knelt among them, she realized something strange. Some teeth were baby teeth, others worn and yellowed with age. They weren't random. They belonged to people, men, women, children. It was as if the land itself had become a grave, spitting up the pieces of every life it had swallowed. She pressed her palm against the dirt and whispered, "What do you want from me?" For a moment, she thought she heard a voice whisper back, "To be remembered." News of the Tooth Farm spread quickly through Missouri Valley. People came from neighboring towns, curious, frightened, fascinated. Some paid Clara just to see it. Others prayed at the fence, calling it a miracle. A preacher declared it a sign from God, proof that the dead were rising. But Clara only watched them with tired eyes. "Don't you see?" she said. "It's not a blessing. It's a warning." One night, a group of drunk young men snuck into the field laughing, daring each other to pull up teeth as souvenirs. By morning, they were gone. All that remained were their boots, filled with blood and more teeth. After that, no one came near. That autumn, Clara began to dream of her son again, the boy she'd lost to scarlet fever back east. He stood at the edge of the field, smiling with a mouth too full of teeth. "Mama," he said softly, "you planted me." She woke crying, clutching her chest. In her delirium, she went to the field and dug where the biggest molars grew. Her shovel hit something hard, a small wooden box. Inside was a photograph of her husband and son, the same one she'd buried with them back in Maryland. On the back, written in her husband's hand, were the words, "Home is where we return, not where we rest." Clara fell to her knees. Somehow, impossibly, the earth had carried her grief across miles. The field wasn't just haunted, it was mourning with her. As winter approached, the field began to shift. The ground rose and fell like breath, and the rows of teeth started to move, aligning into a pattern that terrified and awed her. A vast jawline, half buried, stretching across the entire farm. The whispers became clearer. They were voices, hundreds, maybe thousands, all murmuring her name. "Clara, Clara." Eli came running one night, shouting for her to leave. "It's not a farm anymore. It's alive." But she didn't move. She stood at the center of the field as the teeth began to chatter, the soil splitting open beneath her boots. From the dark fissure below came a sound like a heartbeat. And in the echo of that terrible rhythm, she heard the truth. The land wasn't refusing to grow. It was trying to speak. And Clara Whitlow was the first in 100 years willing to listen. The next morning, Clara awoke to silence. the kind of silence that presses on the ears. The field was still, no wind, no birds, no sound of life at all. But the soil had changed. The teeth that once gleamed white were now stained red, as if the earth had bitten something. Eli arrived, breathless and afraid. "You have to leave, Clara," he begged. "That land's feeding on you." She shook her head, her face pale and resolute. "No, Eli. It's trying to tell me something. I can feel it." Together, they began to dig at the center of the field, where the largest molars formed a ring. The deeper they went, the softer the earth became, until their shovels hit wood, a coffin, old and splintered. Carved crudely on its lid was a name, Jonathan Crane. When they pried it open, there was no body, only soil, and dozens of baby teeth scattered inside like seeds. Clara stared into that box and whispered, trembling, "They planted their own dead." That night Eli returned with the sheriff. They sat around Clara's stove as she read aloud a letter she'd found hidden under the coffin lid, written by Martha Crane, Jonathan's wife. "The fever took our children first. The doctor said to bury them deep, but my husband wouldn't. He said the land had fed us. Now it was our turn to feed it. He planted them in rows like corn, said they'd come back stronger, said we'd never starve again." The letter ended abruptly, smeared with brown stains that might have been blood. Sheriff Madsen leaned back, pale. "That's no curse, ma'am. That's madness." But Clara shook her head. "Madness doesn't make the ground move." Outside, the wind howled across the field, and in its voice, she swore she heard children laughing, softly, hungrily. The following week, the earth began to heave and crack. The rows of teeth moved as if something massive beneath the soil was shifting, pressing upward. Clara stood at the edge, lantern in hand, watching the ground pulse like a throat trying to swallow. Eli shouted for her to get back, but she only whispered, "It's almost done speaking." The cracks widened, and a foul, warm breath rose from the earth. The teeth began to chatter violently, grinding against one another until one by one they fell out, revealing gaps like sockets. And from those gaps came voices, hundreds of them, overlapping, whispering in pain. "We were hungry. We were buried hungry." Clara dropped to her knees, tears streaking her face. "Then let me feed you," she whispered. Clara refused to leave the farm. Day after day she sat in the field, reading aloud from her Bible, singing old lullabies, and listening to the whispers grow fainter. Eli watched helplessly. "You're fading," he said one morning. "You don't eat. You don't sleep." "I'm not meant to," she said softly. "The land needs peace. It took their pain. Maybe it can take mine too." That evening, under a blood-orange sunset, she walked barefoot into the center of the field. The teeth trembled around her like frightened children. She pressed her hand to the soil and whispered, "If you must eat, eat what's left of my sorrow." Then she lay down. The ground moved gently, almost tenderly. When Eli found her the next morning, she was gone. Only her bonnet remained, and a small patch of earth blooming with white, perfect teeth shaped like a smile. Snow covered the Missouri Valley that year. The farm lay silent, its teeth buried beneath frost. Eli inherited the land but refused to plow it. He built a small fence and a wooden sign that read, "Do not disturb the dead." But sometimes, at dusk, he saw faint footprints in the snow. Bare, small ones, circling the field as if children were still playing there. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew right, he swore he heard Clara's voice singing softly to them. The town stopped speaking of the Tooth Farm. They called it cursed, fenced it off, and moved on. But Eli visited every Sunday, leaving a single candle by the fence. "For peace," he would whisper. In the spring of 1893, a stranger arrived, Dr. Samuel Keene, a young scientist from St. Louis with a fascination for unnatural soil phenomena. He'd heard rumors of Clara Whitlow's farm and wanted to study it. Eli, now older and weary, refused him. That field's a graveyard, not a laboratory. But Dr. Keene was persistent. He dug samples at night, believing the stories to be superstition. 3 days later, he came running to Eli's porch, pale and shaking. "I dug 6 inches down," he gasped. "The dirt was full of human molars, and they were still growing." I watched one split in two. Eli said nothing. He just pointed toward the field and murmured, "She's still there, keeping them quiet. Don't wake her." Years passed. The Crane Farm became legend, a ghost story told by lantern light. But for Eli, it was never just a tale of horror. It was a reminder. He began speaking at the local church, telling people, "The earth remembers what we give it. If we bury cruelty, it will feed on cruelty. But if we plant mercy, it may yet bloom." The townsfolk didn't always understand, but they listened. And slowly, the Missouri Valley changed. Farmers started treating their land kindly, sharing harvests, tending graves with care. Eli would smile quietly when people thanked him. "Don't thank me," he'd say. "Thank Clara Whitlow." She taught the valley how to listen. By 1910, Eli was gone, and a new generation had forgotten the warnings. A wealthy developer bought the Whitlow property, planning to build homes. The workers laughed at the stories. They dug deep, laying foundations. That night, the ground began to shake. The teeth came back, thousands of them, pushing through the dirt like tiny white flowers. The next morning, the crew found the machinery buried in mud, and the foreman swore he heard a woman humming through the mist. The project was abandoned. The land was sold again and again, but no one could tame it. The locals simply called it the Mouth. In 1936, during the Dust Bowl years, a young orphan named Ruthie Parsons, Eli's granddaughter, wandered to the edge of the old Whitlow farm. She was hungry, barefoot, and alone. As she sat by the fence crying, she heard a soft, familiar voice whisper, "Don't be afraid, child. The earth won't hurt you." The soil beneath her hand was warm. She dug gently with her fingers, and there, half buried, she found a single golden kernel of corn glowing faintly among the white teeth. She planted it at home in a tin cup. By spring it had grown into a tall stalk, the only living green thing for miles. Ruthie took it as a sign. She became a farmer, and wherever she worked, her fields grew lush, healthy, and strong. People said she had the Whitlow touch. She only smiled and said, "No, I just listen." Many decades later, when Ruthie was an old woman, she returned to the Missouri Valley to see the place where it all began. The fence was still there, though weathered and broken. The field lay quiet under a golden sunset. She knelt and whispered, "Thank you, Miss Clara." The wind stirred, carrying with it a soft sound, the rustle of leaves, the faint click of teeth, and a woman's voice, kind and tired, saying, "You've grown well, child. The land remembers kindness too." Ruthie smiled through her tears. The earth beneath her hand was no longer cold. For the first time in a century, the soil smelled rich, alive, not of bone, but of rebirth. That night, when the moon rose over the valley, a strange and beautiful thing happened. The teeth that once covered the ground began to crumble into dust, dissolving into fertile black earth. And from that earth, a single field of white lilies bloomed, soft, pure, and silent, like 1,000 souls finally at peace. The townsfolk called it a miracle. But Ruthie knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was an apology, the land's way of saying thank you. And so ended the story of the farm that refused to grow anything but teeth, until someone came along who planted compassion instead of fear.